On this episode of the Captain's Lifestyle Podcast, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Kashif Khan at the Biohacking Congress in Austin, Texas. Kashif is a serial entrepreneur, a TEDx speaker, and the CEO of the DNA Company. He's been interviewed by many of the world's top podcasters, including Ben Greenfield, Dave Asprey, and Tom Bilyeu. And after hearing him speak at the Biohacking Congress, I knew I had to have him on the show for you guys. So after he spoke, I went up to him, asked if he had time for an interview. We found an empty room, sat down, and made it happen. What he's doing at the DNA Company is truly revolutionary, as you'll hear in this episode. It's unlike any other DNA test kit out there. I've done 23andMe. This is way better. First off, they don't sell your data like 23andMe does. So if you're worried about having another company in charge of your DNA and profiting off it, which is super sketchy, that's not something you have to worry about with the DNA Company. How they're able to do that is by providing personalized coaching based on your genetic results, which is actually going to be the part 2 of this interview, where I sit down with Kashif again, and he gives me his specific recommendations that I can implement, whether that's lifestyle habits, supplement protocols, you name it, based on my specific genetic code. Super cool. So if that sounds interesting to you, then click the link in the description and you get an exclusive discount on the DNA Company and your kit for being a listener of the Captain's Lifestyle Podcast. All right, now before we dive into this interview, I want to give you a word from our sponsors. Keep in mind, your support to this podcast and the sponsors is what allows me to continue bringing you this information every single week. I hand select my sponsors because I personally use them and I know that they can benefit you as well. So first up, this episode is brought to you by Bioptimizers. Specifically, I want to highlight their product Magnesium Breakthrough, which is actually my number 1 recommended supplement because up to 80% of Americans are deficient in magnesium. This is due to a few factors like poor farming practices, our soil has been depleted of nutrients, our high-stress lifestyles, and intense workouts where we sweat out magnesium. Why is this a problem? It's a problem because magnesium plays a role in over 300 different enzymatic functions. So now that we're not getting sufficient magnesium from our diet, we need to supplement it. Because some of those things that magnesium plays a role in are things like deep sleep, which is where your body recovers itself, like stress and anxiety management, something a lot of us are struggling with. That could just be because you are deficient in magnesium. So that is why it is my number 1 recommended supplement. It also plays a role in digestion and blood sugar and energy and even things like headaches and muscle cramps. So it's like a shotgun for health. If you want a shotgun for your health, then head over to magbreakthrough.com/Taylor and you get a discount on Magnesium Breakthrough. Next up, this episode is brought to you by HVMN, specifically their new travel shots that I've been obsessed with because I travel a lot. I can take them on planes. I keep them in my backpack, keep them in my car, my gym bag, everywhere because they are fantastic at an instant mental clarity boost. About 20 minutes after, you'll feel the heightened mental clarity effects. I've had many podcast guests say that they feel buzzing, which is exactly how I describe it. I like to call it rocket fuel for your brain and body. I also take them before workouts because it provides a very nice physical endurance. You can just keep going and going on this stuff. It also reduces hunger cravings, which I was chugging these at the Biohacking Congress because of all these great speakers like Kashif. I didn't want to miss any of the talks, so instead of taking a lunch break, I would just take my shots of Ketone IQ. You guys can get the hookup on Ketone IQ if you head over to hvmn.com and enter code CaptainMorgan_20. That will save you 20% on HVMN's ketones. Next up, this episode is brought to you by Aries. And now that I'm back home in my home base, I've got larger Aries EMF protection. This one right here covers the entirety of my room from EMFs. EMFs stand for electromagnetic fields that cause oxidative stress in the body. This can cause things like tinnitus, headaches, fatigue, irritability, brain fog, like you name it. A lot of stuff can be contributed to high exposure to EMFs. Even things like cancer, Alzheimer's, dementia, and even autism has been linked to too much exposure to EMFs. So I protect myself. I've actually noticed that my tinnitus has almost gone away now that I've started protecting myself from EMFs. Because back when I was in the Marine Corps, I was a machine gunner. For those of you who don't know, I had tinnitus, and I attributed that to the shooting of the machine gun, the loud noises next to my ear. But then when I got out of the Marine Corps, I was still experiencing tinnitus. And it wasn't until I started learning more about holistic health and the effects of EMFs and how one of the things that EMFs can cause is tinnitus after I started protecting myself, the tinnitus basically went away. It's very rare that I experience this ringing in my ears. And I attribute that to protecting myself. So one of the things you can do is turning your phone on airplane mode. My phone's in airplane mode most of the day until I need to use it. Another super effective strategy that I use is Aries device on my phone. So I've got one right now. I'm recording. I've got one on my computer, and I've got the big one that covers my entire room. You guys can get the hookup on EMF protection for yourself. If you head over to the link in the description, that will get you an exclusive discount for being a listener of this show. Last but not least, this episode is brought to you by Lambs. More EMF protection. Clothing, specifically, not this shirt, but I wear them when I travel. I wear their beanie, their shirt, and their underwear because it blocks up to 99% of harmful electromagnetic frequencies. Unlike Aries, that doesn't block the EMFs, Lambs actually blocks the EMFs from penetrating you. And this is good, especially when in crowded places like airports or malls, when everybody's on their devices, there's a lot of EMFs and there's 5G towers. That's a problem, right? So every time I travel, I deck myself out in Lambs gear. And when I do, back before I knew about the damages of going through the TSA airport security scanners because of high levels of EMFs, I would walk through there and my whole body would light up as if it was metal because I was wearing my Lambs gear. So it's proof that this stuff works. You guys can get the hookup if you use code Captain Morgan. Click the link in the description to get the hookup on that. All right, now let's get into this wonderful interview with Kashif Khan.
Oh, okay, because I bought this stuff.
It's great.
Yeah, I first saw this, I think, at Dave's conference. No, not Dave. I saw it online somewhere. Yeah, and I bought it.
They're blowing up.
You probably saw the ad with him in it.
Maybe it was. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Because he did ads for them too.
You just twist it.
Oh, just twist it?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Cheers.
All right, man. Awesome.
All right. Welcome to the Captain's Lifestyle Podcast. I have with me here Kashif.
Yes, sir.
Correct pronunciation?
That's perfect.
Kashif Khan?
Yeah.
All right. And we are going to talk about the DNA company. We are here at the Biohacking Congress, and your talk so far has been my favorite. It was fascinating. It's a lot of things that are not yet mainstream, but need to be.
Yeah.
Right? Because specifically, what I want to touch on, definitely the replacing pleasure with reward, definitely women's health, because that's one of the reasons I don't coach women, because I have no idea about the hormonal cycle and all that stuff. But before we get into that, I want to hear about your persistence with Dave Asprey and how you got into that world, because that's from what I heard, a good story.
Like any other biotech genetic research company, when we started off, first of all, we started because I was personally ill and used genetics to heal myself. And then when you start researching, building a company, you figure you're going to do what everybody else does. You got to solve cancer. You got to solve these big genetic problems. And in doing that, I learned through healing myself, there's so much more that you could apply genetics to. Like you said, mood management, hormones, something as simple as hair loss even, right? You name a problem, we can look at genetics to solve it. And so I thought, okay, I need to find somebody that, health enthusiasts follow. And I didn't even know the word biohacking at that time.
What year is this?
This was like 2018, I think.
Okay.
Right? So I started searching like wellness influencer and all this stuff, and this Dave guy keeps popping up. So when I learned about biohacking, I was like, wow, there's this thing called biohacking. So I checked his calendar to see where he was going to be, and I just flew there. He was speaking at this conference. So I show up, and I start following him, like, I need to ask you a question. He's like, yeah, don't worry. 45 minutes of don't worry, because he was just waiting for me to go away. Then finally, he's like, what do you want? I said, spit in this tube, I need your DNA. He said, I've done every DNA test there is known to man. I said, yeah, and they all suck, right? He said, yeah. Another 30 minutes, I had to follow him. He ignored me. Finally, he turns like, give me this thing. He goes on Instagram Live. He's like, I'm doing a DNA test. This thing's going to change my life. Let's find out. I'm going to tell you guys in a month how it all goes. He did the test, blew his mind. He ended up asking if he could be an advisor. He now invested in the company. He loves what we do. It really supported us, helped get us out there in this sort of biohacking world and beyond now. Now it's like we're going everywhere. So anyways, that's how we kind of got things going.
I love that. Yeah. Before we get into more of what you do now, what gave you that mindset of persistence and just showing up there and like going after what you wanted?
So it's rooted in my genetics, right? So I have, if you name my profile, it's called Warrior Genetics. I'm going to tell you my WhatsApp profile picture is a guy wearing a turban smoking a shisha pipe that I found online. And my mom's always telling me, get rid of that stupid picture, you look stupid, right? I go to this museum one day and I found this painting on the wall of that exact guy. I just happened to find it on Google, a random picture of a guy in a turban. And I sent it to my mom saying, you keep telling me to take this thing off. It's some famous king or whatever. So she says, read the plate. What is it? So I tell her. She's like, oh, that's your great something grandfather. I'm like, what are you talking about? And why am I finding this out in my 30s? Right? You never told me once before. She said, yeah, he was the king of Kabul. And, we just don't talk about it. Yeah. And it happened to be this random picture. So anyways, I am wired for warrior genetics. Means constant stress, constant progression. That's what I need to not feel depressed. Why? Goes to the thing that you started off with, which is my ability to experience dopamine, the thing that gives you satisfaction, that gives you pleasure or reward, slim to none. Because the gene that drives the amount of receptors that I have, DRD2 is what it's called, mine is the worst version. So my receptors are somewhat sparse. It's hard for me to feel that intensity of pleasure. Then once the pleasure is done, you have to break the chemical down because you need to get back to normal. My pace at which I break it down is the fastest possible. So I feel it like slim to none, and it hardly lasts. It's basically done before it even started. And so that leads to this reward-seeking behavior. Big risk. I'm willing to take the risks because whatever I did 5 minutes ago isn't good enough anymore, right? And you progress, and you can progress down the addiction route. Whatever I did in 5 minutes enough isn't good anymore. Or down the reward route, which is I need more and you end up achieving. And this is why you see there's different types of entrepreneurs. The entrepreneur who's well-structured and well-planned, who's the opposite of me, right? Who's so methodical that it just ends up working as a plan is so perfect. Then
Can you give us an example of that type of entrepreneur?
My co-founder. My co-founder was the exact opposite. He has the maximum. No, sorry, his name is Harris. He's actually in the UK right now, getting things set up there. So he has the maximum dopamine expression and the slowest possible clearance. So for me, where I'm like, go, 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 this is so exciting, yes, yes, yes. He's always no, no, no. What about the risk? What about the problems? You can't really get me excited because I'm good with whatever's going on anyway, because my dopamine levels are so high. I don't need reward. And when he eventually finds something, he works on it very deep because his clearance is very slow. So he gets stuck. He gets stuck in that moment of reward or pleasure. Gotcha. Same thing with food. Give him a buffet and he'll be there all night, right? Because he just can't stop. So this is where we learn, even the way we coach our team, we speak to different people in different ways because we know how they're actually wired, right? So yeah, it's that reward-seeking behavior is the reason why I said, Dave Asprey, okay, I'm getting on a plane. I don't care. I'll buy a ticket. I'll go. I'll figure it out. Once I get there, I'll figure it out. It was my mentality, right?
So then second type of entrepreneur that you were describing.
Yeah, so I personally spent a lot of time interviewing entrepreneurs to understand how to build our reports and how to teach people about their genomics. And I interviewed multiple billionaires and a lot of sort of Deca and Centa millionaires. And then I also interviewed, and when I say interview, meaning I have their genetics in my hand and I'm coaching them on their genetics, right? But I'm also learning. That's why I call it an interview.
Yeah.
And I also, not the guys who were the millionaires and billionaires, but the guys running their businesses, the COOs, the fund managers, these types. And what I learned was that the millionaire and fund manager, the guy that's running like $1 billion real estate fund, they succeed because of their ability to say no. They have a low risk tolerance and a high ability to say no to pleasure and reward. Yeah. Because they're very satisfied with things. And that's what it was, is that they didn't get excited until something was truly, truly exciting. The billionaire was the opposite, right? And the reason why they got there is because they were willing to take the big risk. Okay. Then they probably failed 4, 5, 6 times before they got there. The other guy never failed, right? He was risk adverse, got it right, highly methodical in his approach, did that one thing really, really well, and didn't care about the noise. Yeah. This guy, give me the noise, and I'm going to filter out and tell you exactly how to make this work and make that work and make that work, and I want to do it all, right? And one of these things is going to hit, and I'm going to strike it, and that's what happens. They end up becoming a billionaire.
You were on Impact Theory with Tom Bilyeu,
yeah,
correct?
A few months ago, yeah.
Do you have his DNA? Like, did you do a report on him?
It's coming, but even just so, we've done this so many times that I just talk to somebody now, and I understand what's going on in their head.
What's going on in Tom Bilyeu's head?
So what he's doing is a blend of both. he has this high dopamine response, but his clearance is fast. So he's shifting gears, multi-prioritizing, multitasking. So it's a unique profile. And this is my belief, don't have his DNA, but just from talking to him, spending time with him, this is what I see, that there's this somewhat of low risk tolerance, right? Hyper focus, but it doesn't last long enough. He's able to move on to the next thing. He's able to think about several things at the same time, even within his business or within whatever he's doing at the moment, right? So that's that combination you see. High dopamine, fast clearance, move on to the next thing.
So what can people do if they want to focus on something, but they keep getting distracted?
Yeah.
Like so we know, at least I know of like all the external factors to help make that happen, whether it's supplements or like ice baths can increase dopamine.
Sure.
If somebody has if somebody doesn't have this specific gene, I don't know this language, but if somebody has the other type of entrepreneurship gene, how can they stay focused on something if they want to, or should they not at all?
So it's not just that gene, first of all. There's other things that come into play. We can talk about a couple of them and then answer the whole thing, right? So serotonin is another big factor. Serotonin, we think of it as your mood regulator. Like, am I balanced? Am I responding appropriate for whatever's going on? Or am I over or underwhelmed, right? That's serotonin. So what it's actually doing is prioritizing all the stimulus around you. It's allowing your brain, if your serotonin is working well, to focus on whatever the task at hand is, right? And give it full attention. If it's not doing well and it's dysregulated and your receptor is a little shorter, then you're constantly responding to everything. You can't help but notice the guy in the corner or the weird noise or the weird smell or the whatever. Somebody's ticking their pen. Can you please stop? I can't focus, right? That's serotonin dysregulation. So now that person expresses it a little differently. Whereas one on the dopamine side is either reward seeking or reward adverse. So they might appear to be ADHD because they're saying yes to everything, or they might appear to be ADHD because they're saying no to everything and not interested. Both have labels, right? This person has a hyper attention. It's not a ADHD problem, it's a hyper attention problem. They give everything attention. But to the people looking from the outside, it looks like they can't focus, right? It looks like they're not interested in one particular thing. So if you pick, and there's other reasons we can get into, but even just you take these two or three, the solution isn't one size fits all. That's the key. The key isn't here's how you solve anxiety, here's how you solve depression. Depression, in my mind, unless it's clinical, doesn't exist. The majority of what we're experiencing as depression isn't a real thing. What it is you are wired like me to be reward seeking, to be a warrior, and you're sitting there at some 9-to-5 job, not getting the reward, right?
Yeah.
That's depression.
Yeah.
Because the satisfaction that everybody else gets from that, you don't get. How is that going to, 5 years into that, what are you going to feel, right? So same thing with anxiety. We see anxiety as multiple things. There's a burdensome anxiety, which is more acute, like crash, I can't get out of bed. There's a chronic, every day, I'm always anxious. And then there's this more high functioning anxiety. So take my reward seeking profile and add serotonin dysregulation to it, which means not only am I reward seeking, but I see every little detail and I understand and catch every little thing and everything bugs me and there's this fire in my gut. That creates this high functioning anxiety. And you see a lot of entrepreneurs that are picture Devil Wears Prada. You know, that boss, the magazine lady, whatever her name was. You know, I think she's supposed to be Anna Wintour, right? This like crazy woman that everyone's scared of.
Yeah.
That's that high functioning anxiety.
Okay.
She cannot find anyone that can operate at her level, so she's never satisfied. She's always disappointed, right? Because the way she sees the world, the level of detail, the nuances in every little agreement, every little piece of work, and then what gets delivered back to her never matches. And it creates this high functioning, like everything sucks. No one's good enough. I have to do it myself, right? The reality is you need to tone it down to 8 out of 10 because that's where the world actually is. You have the superpower that people don't see the world that way, right?
Yeah.
So understanding who you are, personalizing it, there's no one size fits all, and then all of a sudden you thrive.
Got it.
Right?
So for somebody who, say, works a 9-to-5 job,
Yeah.
and they are depressed, are those typically the people who turn to addictions of whatever sort to get that pleasure because they're not getting the reward?
Exactly. So your satisfaction is the key, right? So both pleasure and reward are what gets you there. And you can choose either path because you don't need both. And this is where we often coach people that if you're stuck in this pleasure-seeking mode, or if you feel like you don't have enough pleasure, which could cause depression, anxiety, and various other problems, let's try building some reward. How do you do that? Your brain doesn't care if it's a 10 out of 10 reward or a 2 out of 10 reward. Just getting over the threshold of accomplishing gives you that dopamine hit. Okay. Right? And it's a very healthy path to go down. When you go golfing, why is it so addictive? Because every time you hit the ball, you feel a little bit better, and a little bit better, and a little bit better. And there's that sense of reward.
If you're good.
Yeah, if you're
If you're not good, then
it's horrible. Then it falls apart. Same thing with training, going in the gym, getting those, like anything you can do to create some structure, even as simple as I read 2 pages today, tomorrow I'm going to read 2.5. Just that one sense of reward I accomplished can replace pleasure, right? And all of a sudden, removing my addiction is difficult if I don't replace it with fulfillment and satisfaction. So get the satisfaction from reward. We teach this to people and it works. So it's a quick hack to get yourself out of that addictive tendency because you need the dopamine hit from somewhere.
Yeah. So what I notice working with guys in this similar situation is that they understand that the addiction and the pleasure seeking is a problem, and when they try to adopt these healthy habits, they get down on themselves because they're not doing everything all at once, and they focus on what they're not yet doing as opposed to the progress that they've already made and taking these small steps.
Yep.
So what is your recommendation for someone like
this? So someone that has this reward seeking behavior needs a lot more structure, because they will burn themselves out, right? They remember, whatever is good enough is not good enough for them.
Yeah.
And if you tell them, here's the 10 things we're going to do over 10 weeks, they're going to try and do it in 2 weeks because that makes it feel more rewarding, right? So they need to know that the actual success is getting one thing done. It's not getting if you got everything done, you actually failed, right? Because you're not actually going to learn the habit. It's not going to be permanent. So let's fix one thing, make it permanent, then stack the next, and the stacking becomes the reward as opposed to the here's my list. I'm going to run through the list because I'm better than everybody, right? Yeah. They need to learn what the reward. So as long as they're getting that hit, they're going to feel good. You have to reframe, what the value of the hit is. The value is 10 weeks is the timeline, and if you're shorter, you failed, right?
Okay, that makes so much sense. And you said that the brain can't differentiate between level 10 reward and level 2 reward.
Yeah,
so it's just like any small progression.
With pleasure, there's sensation of intensity.
Yeah.
Right? Food is good. That food is really good. Right? And you definitely can feel the difference. When it comes to reward, that nuance isn't so much there. I'm not saying it's not there, but it's not as obvious consciously to the person as it is in pleasure. Right? So any sense of accomplishment gets you there. It gets you over that hump of this reward. Now I need the next one. Now I need the next one. Now I need the next one.
Yeah. So would that explain, like, Olympic gold medalists, for example, who win the gold medal and then they're still not satisfied? Like, they're like, okay,
where's
what's
the next hit?
Yeah.
Where's the next hit, right? Yeah. Okay. And that's why you see so many hyper successful people that are suicidal. Anthony Bourdain, why did he kill himself? He's at the top of his game, right? What is there to be worried about? Or that the gentleman that worked with Ellen that killed himself recently. I think the musical, the head of the band or whatever that was. I don't know his name. Sorry,
I'm not familiar.
Okay, so Ellen DeGeneres talk show.
Yeah.
The guy that did the music on the show.
Okay.
Her show got canceled. He killed himself.
Wow.
Right? People are saying the two aren't related, but when you're at this level of reward and you take it away and you crash, what's my next gig? And you didn't get that next gig, perhaps. And the way you feel when you have this, what got him in the first place? What got him to the point where he got that Ellen gig? He had to fight for that.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the person. This is why you see so many high performance people that when they're done with the reward, they're done with the achievement, they're done with whatever, depression is the next step.
Do you work with many veterans?
We have. I wouldn't say many, but we definitely have, mostly around PTSD.
Okay. Do you imagine that what we've just been explaining is something similar that happens in veterans when they exit the military and they no longer have that sense of purpose or brotherhood? Then that can lead them down the road of addiction, more pleasure seeking.
For sure. So it becomes your identity, right? So to do that level of work, to go out there and do what those guys do, imagine how deep down that reward path you have to be.
Yeah.
Right? You're removing all fear, removing all friction. It's like go, warrior mode. Now to turn that off is not a switch, right? You can't just go do your job now, right?
Yeah.
Go take care of the kids.
Yeah.
You can't turn that off, right? Especially when you're deployed for months at a time. Then we were talking earlier about adrenaline and the noradrenaline response. These guys are constantly in an adrenaline rush, constantly, right? Which means they're constantly imprinting the feeling that they're experiencing. And some people do this more and more than others. We can determine that genetically, which means PTSD, right? It's not just that they're doing something traumatic, and so some of them come back with PTSD. They're doing something traumatic under constant adrenaline. And adrenaline is a neurochemical that causes you to imprint things and remember them and recall them. And so that recall of, when they think about it or they go to work and they do something that even reminds them of what they were doing over there, the feeling comes back, right? And then this new work feels like that.
Yes.
Right? This reminds them of that, even though they have nothing to do with each other, right? Open a laptop. There was a day that the guy opened the laptop on the top of the Humvee, and it reminds me of that. It's a direct anchor to that feeling, and it's going to bring it back as if it's just happening right now. So not everyone does that, but for the guys that do, that could be the one thing preventing them from reintegrating.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I'm a Marine Corps veteran, and I now have a men's community.
Right.
And in the military, that's one of the main things that keeps people sane is the brotherhood and the connection. And I've noticed that with a few veterans who are now in the men's community, they now feel that sense of purpose and brotherhood with this new community. So that goes along with exactly what you're saying. I imagine it's the exact same thing with ex-professional athletes who then retire and they work a corporate job. Same story.
For sure. Okay. It's the same with to be at that level of performance and just turn it off.
Yeah.
Right? That's not the way. By the way, when you get into warrior mode, it causes you to upregulate your testosterone. When you upregulate your testosterone, it causes you to get into warrior mode. And then you get into more testosterone. And there's a cycle forward, right? Until eventually you're a screaming banshee that's just like ripping through the wall, tearing everything apart. You picture that Olympic athlete, right? Yeah. They're there at that end of that tunnel, right? So when you're that far down that path, again, like I said, you don't just turn that switch off. You have to unwind that slowly, right? You're at a certain androgenized level, like testosterone level. You're at a certain warrior mode. Your neurochemicals aren't firing at baseline. They're firing thinking that that's your new reality, that you need to be in warrior mode, front lines. And that takes months to unravel. Right? You don't just turn it off. And it's true of anyone operating at high performance, right? By the way, the opposite is also true. When you take a step back and you're like, okay, I'm going to relax now, you get more estrogenized. And the estrogenized puts you into warrior as opposed to warrior mode. And then you step back more. And then there's more estrogen, and then you step back more, and you go into a cycle backwards. And this is why you see the guy who decided to take a break, again, the vet also becomes the couch potato that doesn't move after a few months. Right? Because the day they decide, I give up, I'm not going to try anymore, that pushes them back and back and back and back where they're just done. They can't even get off the couch anymore.
Okay. So let's take it back to average Joe, 9 to 5.
Yeah.
He's depressed. I want to hear your take on this. Is it possible to live an optimally healthy, happy life if you don't like your job? Like you do all of the hacks to remedy depression, anxiety, and you're still working the job that gives you no sense of purpose or reward.
Yeah. So there's two things there, purpose and reward, right? Reward is a little bit easier thing to deal with. Purpose is difficult. If you have zero sense of purpose in your work, you're not going to be happy. Right? There has to be purpose, and we are wired for that. Like why is dopamine so important for our neurological system? And why is it? Because that's the thing that makes us progress as an entire society. Right? The reason why we have machines and robots and things that are flying around is because we keep striving for more. Yeah. Right? And that's rooted in dopamine. So that without that purpose, you're not going to do anything, and you're going to get depressed. Right? And whether it's depression, anxiety, just general mood disorders, whatever it is, purpose is super, super important. And if you don't have it in your work, build it in. Find a way to build it in.
How can we do that?
So if you're stuck, like I have to do this work, I don't have an option, right? Well, I'm sitting there and I input data into a computer for this big company because that's the only option I have today and I hate it, right? What does that company do? Who do they help, right? What are you haven't yourself given that job purpose. You don't understand how it's aligned to the mission, right? You're thinking of it in the bubble of the job itself.
Yeah.
So if you need to cope with that and you don't have the ability to go do the thing that is actually your purpose, if you've already identified that, most people haven't, create the purpose, right? Your brain is just asking for it. So what is the mission of this thing you're doing? Who are you helping, right? Every product helps somebody with something, right? Build the purpose in and give it to yourself. But you have to sort of create that cognition and awareness around it first. There's some work there, right?
Yeah.
And around the reward side, that's easier to do because you can get reward somewhere else. It doesn't have to be from your work, right? Reward can be just your income. It can be that simple if it's not your purpose again. And you can get reward elsewhere, in the gym, with your kids, studying, learning, painting, cooking. Do something where you're constantly progressing and getting your reward.
Got it. So while we're on this topic of reward, I feel it pertinent that I share my purpose.
Yeah.
Just to hashtag make thriving standards.
Awesome.
So that's a little sticker
Cool.
for you. And that's one of the things that I do with the guys who go through my program is because once I realized how important purpose and having a mission and values was for me, that became like my treasure map and my compass and my filter through which I do everything else. So to your point on like to create purpose in the interim, ultimately I recommend you quit your job if that's an option and do what you want to do. Another option that I recommend my clients is to think, okay, if you absolutely hate what you're doing right now, think that your purpose is to make this amount of money so that you can, move on to the next thing. Like that becomes your purpose.
That's that one step, right? You're creating that one little next step as opposed to like, how do I completely fix this? No, focus on the next step, right? And make that your reward, make that your purpose.
Okay.
Then you're satisfied.
Okay. And reward. Let's talk on this. Reward comes through overcoming challenges.
Yeah,
correct?
It comes from achievement.
Achievement.
Yeah.
Achievement of anything. Like it
Of
doesn't
anything,
matter.
there's a goal and I hit it, right? There was an outcome that I got to and it was purposeful. So that feeling of and that's why there's this cliff that people fall off because I got there. Now what?
Yeah.
Right? And people experience it in different ways. So the high dopamine person that experiences dopamine at a high level, they're done with whatever the thing is. They may experience a bit of an anxiety and sort of what we call an acute anxiety response. So when you're used to everything being good and everything is satisfactory because your dopamine levels are so high and you stay in it so long, and you remove that, they're not used to feeling this bottom. They don't know that it's foreign to them. They're not used to this. So that creates this acute anxiety response. That's the person that can't get out of bed, that doesn't want to come to work tomorrow, right? That has to go home early. That's that acute anxiety response. The person with the low dopamine, the fast clearance, it's more like depression, right? There's zero pleasure. What happened to pleasure? I was at this high, and now I'm the polar opposite, right? So both of those people need the next hit, right? They definitely need the next hit. The difference is that dopamine, that low dopamine expressing person, it can be somewhat, call it clinically problematic because they're going to keep chasing and pursuing to the point where they burn out. They need structure around them. They need that second person to coach them along and sort of create the frequency that's healthy, right? Yeah.
Speaking of anxiety, I know you said that there's no one size fits all thing. But in general, for anxiety, what, if there even is an in general, what can people do to eliminate their anxiety? Because I believe that anxiety doesn't exist. I believe that depression doesn't, like, it's not an actual disease.
Yeah.
Right? So what have you noticed?
So just like the dopamine reward-seeking pathway is a tool to drive progress, right? That's what we were saying earlier, that none of this stuff would exist if we didn't seek reward, if we weren't trying to win. It's the same thing with anxiety. Anxiety isn't so much about, call it building, constructing, winning, right? When you have, call it that serotonin response we were talking about earlier, right? You're anxious because things aren't good enough, right? When you have a high dopamine response and things come down, you're anxious because the good was taken away and now you're worried. So whereas one is about the warrior, the other one is about the worrier. Now we're dealing with the worrier profile. So with the warrior profile, it's not so much about feed it with more reward like you do with the warrior and keep them on that path in a structured way. It's more about reframing that problem and seeing you identifying the problem as your skill as opposed to the problem being a problem. Meaning, if I can now see all these problems, that doesn't mean that I just created this bunch of crap that I have to deal with. My skill was that. My serotonin dysregulation ability to see all these details, whatever, that's actually my skill. So the outcome shouldn't be, I identified all the things and now I'm anxious. It should be, I identified all these things, now let me pass it on to the guy whose job it is to execute. That's my skill, right? The guy who crashes, that's his skill to be able to worry about what's the next thing, right? We can't stop here. So that worrier mode, so both of these people are important. And that, by the way, me and my business partner, polar opposite. I'm the warrior, he's a worrier. That's why we thrive, right? He sees the world this way, I see the world this way. We had a lot of friction in the beginning, right? We would leave a meeting thinking that we understood what the other guy said, do the polar opposite, and then end up fighting. Right?
Yeah.
But now we understand that I'm supposed to do this part and he's supposed to do this part. So that anxiety is driven by thinking that problem is where things end. Right? Now I have this problem. You're just good at identifying the problem. You're good at seeing it. You're good at bringing it forward. You're good at seeing more details within the problem that other people didn't see. Now give it to the warrior to go do something about.
So this makes sense for entrepreneurs, for example. So we can just delegate those things. What about for, after this we'll get on women's health, because I get a lot of questions about, women's health, and I'm not the expert in that, so I'm definitely excited to talk about that. What would you say to, like, a Sally who works a 9 to 5, who, can't just delegate these things? She's got kids to deal with,
So you kind of see this natural progression in teams anyway. There's that, so at first it's always friction, and then you start to see who's the negative Nancy that's going to find the problem, right? And that becomes their job, right? You know you can depend on them, and a good leader will identify that. So that's one key thing. Is a bad leader sees that as a problem and gets rid of that person, and they actually really need that person, right? They really, really need that person, because typically that entrepreneur at the top isn't going to give a damn about those little details, and then that's where they're going to fail.
Yeah.
Right. So integrating yourself into the team functionally, meaning that. Don't come at it as a problem. Don't come at it as no, maybe we shouldn't do that. It's like, I identified something. Let's work on this, right? Functional as opposed to problematic. Understand that this is a skill you have. Forget about the way it makes you feel. That's because you haven't used the tool. The functional is, I am a detective. I can find all the problems. They normally cause me anxiety. Instead of just holding on to them, I'm going to make a list. And I'm going to create a plan for the person that executes, right? So become that functional team member, and then you'll probably be the most valuable person on the team at that point.
What about in someone's personal life? Like, what if it's not related to business, and they've got all these things that they're worried about, and they are still the ones that have to deal with it?
Yeah. So everything we talked about so far was how to use it, but there's also how to mitigate it, right? Like what therapy, what supplements, there's also that. And
breathing.
Breathing, right? So that exactly what we just did. Deep in through the nose, exhale out through the mouth. Parasympathetic, right? Get yourself into the parasympathetic. You can do it with frequency. There's a tool called the Apollo Neuro. You've probably seen it, right? I was at this dinner with Dr. Rabin, the guy that created this Apollo Neuro, and it was in a room full of people that I didn't know. And we sit at this table, typical banquet style, 10 people. I'm sitting next to him. I don't know anybody, and he could see that I was anxious, right? I knew nobody. And okay, hi, how are you doing? Whatever. He takes this thing, puts it on my chest. And instantly, it was like I was only talking to him. I couldn't hear or see anybody else.
Was it vibrating, or
it wasn't vibrating, but it was emitting a frequency that instantly put me into a parasympathetic state that allowed me to focus on him. So instead of my serotonin focusing on everything else, right, it toned it down and allowed me to focus on him, and none of this mattered anymore.
Wow.
Right? So the answer on the personal side is more, how do I mitigate it? Which is, like you said, and also the frequency. Then there's also 5-HTP supplements, right? You can manage your serotonin. Things like sauna. Sauna is incredible for upregulating brain-derived neurotropic factor, which allows you to give things a little less meaning. So you may notice it, it may be a problem, but is it a burden? Right? That's how much meaning you give something. And brain-derived neurotropic factor and its dysregulation determines how much meaning you give stuff. So if you sauna, I can tell you something really cool is that the Finnish population, people from Finland, are the most likely to have bad BDNF, bad brain-derived neurotropic factor, which leads to these like high-meaning mood issues, drama queen, right? They are also ranked the happiest country in the world.
They sauna all the time.
They sauna every day, more saunas per capita than anyone in the world, right? So their epigenetic habits are overriding their genetics. They're upregulating BDNF through the sauna. And that's probably why they have bad BDNF, because genetically they've been doing this culturally for a long time, right? So that's where you can adopt these habits, the environment, nutrition, and lifestyle habits that upregulate genes so that you don't have to feel that way. But in the context of work, I'd say use it as your superpower, right? It's a tool that's meant for you to be the best of who you are at work. But at home, yeah, you sometimes need to tone things down. And that's where you get into the hacks, right? So that's how you go about it.
Yeah. Delegating is so important.
Yeah.
We don't have to go into that, but that's one of the articles of the captain's code, as you guys know. Delegate tasks to others. Don't just keep all of this on yourself. Let's switch gears a little bit. 60 Minutes, I believe, just came out with a recent segment saying that obesity is genetic.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Someone needs to be slapped.
Okay.
So let me tell you literally, this advisor to the Biden administration, Dr. Cody, I think is her name, was being interviewed, and she literally said that if your parents are obese, that your genetics say that you have 50 to 80% chance of obesity, and it doesn't matter what your nutrition or lifestyle is. It does not matter. It's genetic. In the exact same time window that obesity drugs are being launched. Right?
Imagine that.
Yeah, it's a coincidence. But so what?
And we're the conspiracy theorists.
Yeah. Every conspiracy theory, I just read this yesterday, is a conspiracy theory until 6 months later when it's true, right? In this country, right? So this is what the new narrative is. This walk around. So there's a Gary from our team. He lives in Paris, France. He flew out for this conference. When I saw him, the first thing he said to me is, "This country is so grossly obese. I don't know what the hell's going on." He hasn't been here in a while.
It's like 60%.
Yeah, and what he said to me is, even the skinny people are obese. Meaning
Skinny
they're
fat.
Yeah. They're just not. They're stressed. They're storing fat for whatever reason, right? So it's the CDC said that only 5% of Americans are metabolically healthy, and this is the CDC, so it's probably 2% if they're saying 5%, like, right? So what does that tell you about this country? Go somewhere else. Go to Vietnam, right? Go to Bangladesh. It's not the same numbers. We're all humans. It's food and it's lifestyle. I hate the number one reason I hate traveling to this country from Canada is the food, right? My kid, we went to Disneyland because I had to go to this conference in Orlando a couple months ago, and the treat that I allow her to have is this cake pop from Starbucks because it's small, right? So it's a little bit of sugar and once in a while. We went to the Starbucks at Disneyland. She took a bite and spat it out because it was so intensely and disgustingly sweet versus what we're used to in Canada. Wow. She couldn't even eat it. This is a kid who said it was disgusting, right? Because her palate is designed around that. But I see all the Americans eating it all up like it's amazing, right? So you have a country that is so metabolically unfit because of the habits. And yes, there are some genetics that lead to obesity, but none of them equal obesity. They are all propensity, meaning that if I have less ability to metabolize saturated fats, well, then if I go to a keto diet, I'm probably going to get fat, right? If I have less ability genetically to metabolize starches, well, the average American burger is going to make me fat. The bread plus fats, right? The bread and the thing and the starches. If my insulin response is off, genetically predeterminedly, I'm going to get fat easier from having a high carb diet, right? If I'm more estrogenized, more estrogen than testosterone, I'm going to store more fat than a typical person. If my palate doesn't experience satiety as a normal person, that's a genetic trait. How satisfied, how quickly do you get satisfied? I'm going to overeat. I'm going to go for seconds and thirds. Serotonin dysregulation causes you to lean on food as a coping mechanism, right? Because of the stress. Your body doesn't want to be chronically stressed. So it goes and finds something good to make you happy, which is food.
So like emotional eating.
Emotional eating, exactly. None of these things equal obesity. All of these things can be mitigated. I know that I don't metabolize starch and have a bad insulin response, so I don't eat a bowl of pasta every day, right? I go on more of a paleo diet. I know I don't metabolize fats. Okay, I'm not going to be keto. None of these people have to be obese. And the proof is in the pudding, because leave this country and go to some other countries, and it doesn't look like this. The other proof is in the pudding. Go to Dubai. You land in Dubai, the first thing you see in the airport is these pictures of the grandfather and the father and the current king. And the grandfather is this skinny, really dark guy who used to walk around in the desert. The father's kind of like a brown guy who's a little bit chubby. And the son is this fat white guy. Right?
Yeah.
What's happened in Dubai? The American culture has been exported there. You can't go anywhere without seeing McDonald's or Burger King.
Yeah.
Right? And they love it. Because like, oh, we have McDonald's now, right? They have just as much diabetes as the United States, if not more, actually, I think now. Right? It's not genetic because they didn't look like that 2 generations ago. They didn't have any fat on them. It's the lifestyle, it's the food, it's the environment.
Too much pleasure.
Yeah, too much pleasure. They're sitting indoors. The Indian and Pakistani guys are doing all the work. They're collecting all the money and eating Burger King every day, right?
Yeah.
That's what happened to them.
Yeah.
So it's total nonsense, but it sells obesity drugs.
Yeah. I lived in Saudi Arabia for a while, and I noticed that as well. It's becoming westernized.
Yeah, for sure.
I want to make sure that we cover this. Let's go back to women's health.
Yeah.
So I get asked all the time, like, why do I not coach women? I don't have a clue about their cycle and the hormonal changes, and it just seems like such a complex topic.
Yeah.
And in that talk that you gave, you mentioned it's not. It's purely black and white based on their genetics.
Yeah.
Correct? And lifestyle factors.
So it is it's very gray in the current medical model.
Right.
It's very responsive to, you have bad period cramps, too bad, take this. The answer is usually take this birth control pill, right? That's right? Trying to balance the hormones. So what's going on is we can understand the genetics of how much I make in terms of estrogen, how much do I make in terms of testosterone. So what is the dominance? And men and women do the same thing, by the way. Progesterone converts to testosterone, converts to estrogen. Men have a daily cycle, women have a monthly cycle. That's the difference, right? So the challenge, and this is why it's so much more complex for women, because the thing that we experience during the day, it comes and goes. For women, it stretches for days, right? Each part of that cycle takes longer. So if you are estrogen dominant versus androgen dominant, very different body type, very different mood profile, very different problems, very different benefits. If you make a toxic estrogen, yes, your PMS might suck. And yes, you might have risk of things like breast cancer and greater propensity towards cognitive decline and Alzheimer's. It's an inflammatory insult. And if your detox pathways aren't good, then you're also not getting rid of it. So it's even more of a red flag. So the way we look at the female cycle is, you're exactly right in what you did. If you were to go talk to all these women and say, take this male playbook and go run with it, it won't work. They're going to hurt themselves. Because the hormones, like I said, it's stretched out. So men, your testosterone peaks in the morning, 6 to 8 a.m. There's a second peak in the evening, 4 to 6, if you sleep at the average time, right? So that's when you should train, ideally.
Yeah.
Right? That's when you feel the best. And then there's estrogen in between. You also convert your testosterone into estrogen, and you make a little bit more testosterone. For women, that whole first week of the cycle is when the hormones are dominant. So that's when you're doing your powerlifting, you're heavy as you can go, right? That's when you're building. Then you get into the second week, and your hormones crash, fall off a cliff. And you're highly prone to injury because of the hormones. Your tendons and your ligaments actually become stiff because of what's going on with your hormones. And this is why so many women get injured in that second week, right? The third week is when you're making the toxins. So you don't have the ability to do anything.
Toxins meaning?
The estrogen toxicity.
Okay.
Right? So that's why there's PMS and cramping, etc. So it's more like powerlifting. Let me build in the first 10 days until my ovulation. Then let me do some maintenance type work. I don't want to push where I could snap a tendon, right? I want to maintain. And I'm doing a lot of stretching, and I'm doing a lot of hydration, right? And the third week is more like yoga, light intensity, a little bit of cardio. So it's a monthly structure as opposed to like a daily or weekly structure, right? And it's different for different women. It's not the same answer for everyone,
Yeah.
because if you're more androgenized, the clock might change a little bit for you. If you're more estrogenized, this window gets smaller, this window gets bigger. So you have to personalize, just like you said at the very beginning. It's not one size fits all. We now have the science to get away from all that one size fits all nonsense and do what your body needs.
And was the story that you told about your niece, was that how you first came to this realization on this topic?
That's how I first realized that we could go beyond clinical work to everybody. Right? So every geneticist, every biotech researcher thinks that they are a pharma company trying to solve a disease. That's when I realized that you don't even have to have the disease. I was solving the wrong problem. Right? I was doing what everybody else was doing. Let's use genetics, and I was just trying to do it a little bit better to reverse things, to treat things. Then I realized that we never even asked why we have these things. Right? If we understood that, it doesn't have to happen. Done. So we can prevent, or if it's been a little too long and you have the thing, we can reverse. It's not about treating and masking. It's about understanding the root cause, dealing with that, and these spokes of symptoms go away. So my niece's story is what kind of propelled us into, like, let's help everybody, right?
So is what you just explained, does that go into like epigenetics, like what you can turn on and
Yeah.
off?
So to some degree, the way we look at it is, here's your genome. First step, let's identify your red flags. What isn't working? Because first of all, what is a gene? A gene is an instruction telling your cell what to do. There's 22,000 genes. Most of them don't matter. There's about 100 that are functional, that drive the main systems, hormones, brain, everything we've been talking about today, right? So between those 100, there's different versions of the instruction, and based on the version you have, you may do that job good, bad, medium.
Okay.
Now we can kind of predict what's the priority, right? Where do we focus? There's a big red flag in your endothelium, the inner lining of your blood vessel. You have the worst quality. So that points to bad recovery, cholesterolemia, heart disease, Alzheimer's and stroke. Let's focus there. Then we get into the epigenetics. Now that I know I have this bad quality endothelium, if I go move to a beach in Aruba and eat fish out of the sea, I'm never getting sick.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's no epigenetic load of bad sleep, too much pollution causing inflammation, eating garbage food causing inflammation, stress, all the things that we know that cause these problems. So you then, through identifying the priority and red flag, can then identify the habits epigenetically, environment, nutrition, and lifestyle that are right for you and also wrong for you that you need to remove. That's when the disease becomes optional.
Got it. Yeah, because I've had my DNA tested, not by the DNA company yet. We'll get into that. But I've got like genetic predisposition for type 2 diabetes, obesity. Right. It's like, obviously I'm not getting those things.
Yeah.
Right. So the fact that 60 Minutes came out and said that obesity is 100% genetic is
it's
just ridiculous.
It's the best product placement we've seen to date. That's all it was.
Yeah. Makes sense. Talk to us about the DNA company. So
sure.
All of this is great if they understand how to read the DNA, how to use it. So this is what you guys do, correct?
Yeah, correct. So, me trying to use this tool and understanding that even the tool sucked, right? So it's not just, so genetics was great. The ability for a random individual to go understand their DNA was horrible.
Yeah.
Whatever you get, unless you have a PhD friend, whatever you want to call it, biologist, etc., you couldn't interpret this stuff.
Yeah.
It was this gene is this gene is this, but the body doesn't work like that. The body is systems and pathways. It's not a bunch of independent genes. So that's the first thing we fix. Like, let's go build the algorithm that actually puts stuff in the context of the systems. So then I can tell you about depression and anxiety and keto diet and veganism, as opposed to the ApoA2 gene, which metabolizes fat. Now what do I go do with that information?
Yeah.
Right? So that's step one. Step two is we realize some people, so the reports are built in that way where they speak to problems. Step two is you still need that background information on the genes so that you can apply it to different contexts. Because we've told you about keto diet and depression, etc., but there may be some other problem you're trying to solve. And so if you understand the genes, you can now have that tool permanently to solve any problem, right? Just like you keep asking me questions, I keep interpreting the same information to answer those questions. None of that stuff is in our report, right? This is just me interpreting. So we also built what we call a GeneCast, which is this personalized podcast for each individual, where our AI pulls on all these audio files and gives you this like virtual consult speaking to your DNA. So
Wow.
yeah, so on one end you're reading all these reports about anxiety and hair loss and all this stuff. So it tells you take this supplement, eat this food, whatever. And on the other end, you're getting this like virtual PhD reading your genetics to you, saying you have this version of this gene does this job, which means you might behave like this, which means you might consider this. And by the way, if this other gene looks like this becomes more of a priority, right? So we built that also because we realized people need both, right? So that's what it looks like. It's simple. You spit in a tube, DNA gets extracted, we sequence it, data populates our algorithm, you log into this portal, it kind of looks like Netflix, you're clicking into tiles and drilling in, you're reading these reports, listening to the GeneCast. Then there's some people that need support, meaning I can't lose these last 10 pounds, I have a crazy anxiety problem, prevents me from going to work in the morning, my mom had breast cancer, I don't want it. That's where we have functional genomics coaches that can work on programs with people. So, and my belief is if you have the report and you really go through it, you don't need that to just optimize yourself. But if you're that executive that wants to add 15 years to their life, if you're that pro athlete where your body is your money, if you're that, you know, stay-at-home mom that is responsible for the upbringing of these children and wants the best for them, or there's a clinical issue, then the programs can help you just draw a lot more. And here's your genetic playbook, your playbook, right?
Got it.
So we do that too.
So I know a big concern that a lot of my clients express to me, because I recommend them now 23andMe, which seems like it's going to change after this conversation. They're concerned about data privacy, right? The companies selling their data to other big corporations. How do you guys deal with this?
So first of all, if you're going to buy a DNA test, assume your data is being sold. And the challenge is that unlike any other lab work, like cholesterol testing, whatever, your DNA doesn't change, so we only need to do it once. So the business model sucks.
Right.
That's the big problem. And the investors are saying, we just spent $10 billion figuring this out, and we're going to sell one test to one guy and we're done. Right? So it became a data selling business. And the true buyer, as an example, that 23andMe test you talked about is a few $100s, but the data on the back end is sold for $5,000. So who is the real customer? Who's the product designed for? Who's more important in that scenario? And this is why people are so underwhelmed when they get results, because it wasn't designed for the best outcome for them. It was designed for the data that needed to be collected for the data buyer, which isn't functional. It's just a big data dump, right? So we saw that as an opportunity, thinking the way we think. We're more clinically facing, we help people. If we build the product that is the thing that people need, that in itself isn't sellable. The data buyers don't want that, but we will be the company that is actually solving the problem. So that's what we did. We went down the route. It's in our terms. Everything's anonymized, aggregated. It's your own portal that you log into. Never sold. We're not in that business. We've already said no to offers from pharma companies, etc. We believe if we do this and we understand, understand each health problem the way we do, there's many other things for us to build. We don't need to sell data. We will go do the thing that they were going to do with the sold data. We'll just build it ourselves.
I think there's a huge avenue, which you guys are already doing, of personalized coaching on this. Like, that is a moneymaker for sure.
Cool.
I will personally be doing this, and then we're going to do a round 2 of this podcast sometime in the future to go over my personal results. That's going to be fascinating.
It's going to be awesome,
Okay, cool. So 2 more questions for you. One, what are you most excited about with, it could be in the DNA company, could be something completely unrelated.
So, this is the first time I'm talking about this. We, for the past year, have been trying to work with a telemedicine company to make what we do clinical facing. Meaning today, I'm talking to you, and we're talking to your people. They get this. Go to the average person on the street. It's like, I will call my doctor when I'm sick, right? So
their doctor who's going to tell you to take these obesity pills.
So our thinking is to truly, truly help people. We need to be that doctor. So we just finished making a deal with a telemedicine company where we're now fully licensed in every state, reimbursable by insurance, not the test itself, but the programs. So now we can be clinically facing and nobody can prevent us from doing what we're doing. Right? So that was a big win for us. It took us a good year of work, but it just happened last week. So that's a big one for us.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
breathe through that.
Yeah.
You get a sense of reward from that one?
Oh, huge, man.
Yeah.
Huge. Just like, and that happened the same week that I saw that 60 Minutes obesity clip. And I was just like, get ready, man. Get ready. See what's coming.
It's coming.
Yeah, it's coming.
All right, last question. What does thriving mean to you?
So, thriving to me personally, and I've just been through this, is when it's easy to get to your goal. And I'm not saying that things should be easy, but when you're in that thrive state, mentally, physically, strength-wise, mental-wise, who you're surrounded by, what work you're doing, when you create the terrain, right, including like who you talk to every day, getting what you want becomes so easy. That to me is thrive state, and I'm experiencing that right now. Right? I truly am experiencing that, where everyone around me, everyone I talk to, everything I do, everything I plan, it's just innate. It's just happening, right? So that's when I know I'm in a thrive state. I'm in the right place. I'm doing the right thing, mission driven, ignoring all the nonsense, right? So you have to create the context that makes you thrive, and I feel like I'm there now.
Love it.
Yeah.
Cash,
Yeah.
thank you for coming on Captain's Lifestyle
Pleasure, man.
Podcast.
Pleasure.